Welcome, everyone, to day 3 of Art Mumbai. And for those of you who have just arrived, I'm glad this is the first thing you're doing today. And for those of you who've been walking around, I hope you've had a fantastic day and seen some incredible art and had some great conversation. This is our 3rd edition of Art Mumbai, although to me, it feels like it's been much longer. But I hope you've enjoyed it. And I want to just take a moment before we begin to say thank you to the Kiran Nadar Museum of Art. They have been incredibly supportive of the speaker series, and this is really how we're able to support, plan, and bring together amazing speakers from around the world, all here in Mumbai. I'd like to just start off by introducing very briefly, literally in a line, about this topic. This is something we've been trying to talk about for a while now. But we're really at the intersection of different forms of aesthetics that have emerged from the Indian subcontinent, not just over the last few decades, but over the last several centuries. We come from 5,000 years or more in some cases, of an aesthetic legacy. And what we're trying to do today is combine some of those conversations, talk about the confluence of some of these ideas and how it translates into much of what we may call the indigenous or the vernacular, but in a contemporary context. So our panelists will be discussing the deep and continuing relationship between what's in common parlance known as folk and tribal art, along with classical traditions in Indian art, sculptural, miniatures, and so on, how these intertwine and influence each other and continue to evolve. And without taking too much of your time with this, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our panelists who could do a much better job of discussing this topic than I can. First is Mitchell Kreitz. Mitch is an American art historian who has lived, researched, and worked in India for more than 50 years. He's maybe more Indian than any of us sitting in this room. His primary focus has been the revival of classical Indian and Islamic arts and craft. The other thing he does is maintain a keen interest in indigenous art, in folk and tribal and traditional art. And he does this while wearing many hats. He's a collector, he's a reviver and nourisher of diverse arts and crafts, and he runs the Kreitz Collection and Surrey Design. Much of what we know today about artists like Jangar, about Gond tribal art, much of what has come to the fore, both in terms of imagery and scholarship, is thanks to him and his years of travel and study. Minhazz Majumdar is a curator and writer and designer who has been very deeply involved in preserving and promoting Indian folk and tribal cultural traditions. As a curator, Minhazz has worked on groundbreaking shows in India, in the UK, in the US, and in Australia, and has helped build permanent collections of Indian art, especially indigenous art, for museums in different parts of the world. I'd also like to, I don't know if you can see, Sureshkumar is a bit behind me here, but Sureshkumar is an assistant professor of world history at the National University of Singapore. And his work focuses on long-distance interactions between people in ancient Afro-Eurasia. And he looks specifically with an eye towards movements of flora and fauna. He's also the co-author of Ancient India, Living Traditions, which has recently inspired an exhibition at the British Museum. And it really was a groundbreaking exhibit. And I think more important than the exhibit was very much the thought process behind it. And I can tell you, everybody is talking about his research and what he's been doing. It's really taken the world of scholarship by storm as of late. So with that, I'd like to invite Minhazz to kind of take over moderating this discussion.
Welcome so much, to this session, which I think is going to be very interesting because we are trying to trace not just what happened in the past, but what's happening now. And we'll do this by showing you some slides, and then we'll get into the discussions. So I'd invite Suresh to please start with the slides.
Right. So, thank you, Minal, for the kind introduction. So, my sharing is going to be based, as you heard, on my recent work with the British Museum's Ancient India Living Traditions exhibition, whose book I co-authored, and the lead curator of this exhibition was my colleague, Dr. Sushma Jansari. So, one of the running threads of this exhibition was how the ancient nature spirits, the yakshas, the yakshis, and the nagas, were integrated into various religious traditions of the Indian subcontinent, including Buddhism, Jainism, Vaishnavism, Shaivism, and various other strands of what we call Hinduism. The ancient nature spirits of India were also the first deities to be given human form in the durable mediums of stone and fired clay. Much of this imagery is inspired by ephemeral art forms that no longer exist, and I'll give you some examples of that in the slideshow. Okay, so as I said, the nature spirits, including the yakshas, were very closely associated with trees. In particular, were among the first deities of ancient India to be represented in stone, and they kind of formed a prototype for the figures of later-day enlightened teachers and other deities, including, for example, the god Shiva, who you see on your far left. Now, a lot of these images look similar because they were produced in the same workshops, mostly in the city of Mathura, which is correct, whose output is, a very distinctive red or pinkish sandstone that you see over here. And many of these images look similar. There are only a couple of specific attributes that distinguish them as a Buddha or a deity as such. So very often their right hand is raised in the gesture of reassurance, the Abhaya Mudra, and the left hand is placed close to the hip. In the case of Shiva, you find that he has an erect phallus and he's also carrying a water pot, characteristic of ascetic figures. And those are the small details that distinguish these figures that otherwise look very similar. Again, in the case of other figures like Maya, the Buddha's mother, we find that her image has been developed on the basis of the yakshis, the ancient female nature spirits who are, like the yakshas, also associated with trees. Now, both of these categories of nature spirits, the female yakshis and the yakshas, originally were worshipped in symbolic forms, namely as a stone altar placed beneath a tree. Now, there are lots of coins issued by ancient Indian dynasties that depict how these ancient tree shrines looked like. So it was basically a tree that was surrounded by a Vedika, a railing pillar that demarcated its sacred status. And even in early Buddhist art, the way in which the Buddha is represented was basically as this yaksha tree shrine. So they appropriated this ancient tree shrine model to represent their own enlightened teacher. As you see on this panel from Barhut from the 2nd century BCE, this represents a Buddha of the past, Konagamanan, who is represented by the Udumbara tree. So different Buddhas of the past are represented by different kinds of trees. The historical Buddha Shakyamuni is represented by the sacred fig tree, of course, the Bodhi tree. Another kind of symbolic form that informs the shaping of these nature spirits includes the worship of deities in the form of a Purna Kalasha or Purna Kumbha, right? The pot, the vase of plenty. There are some early drawings that have been dated to the Mauryan period that indicate that this kind of worship was prevalent in earlier periods before the shift to, the worship of these deities in human form. And this might go to some extent in explaining the pot-bellied appearance of some of the yaksha deities as well. So it's not just the case that, the pot belly signals the wealth and the ability to bestow wealth, but the earlier symbolic worship of these deities in the form of auspicious water-filled pots could have also informed the later depiction of them as pot-bellied deities. And we have some examples of this in terracotta as well from earlier periods. And of course, Ganesha inherits this pot-bellied characteristic of the yakshas, and he very much emerges from the same kind of cultural horizon that produced these nature spirits. And of course, these are living traditions, right? We still worship deities in these symbolic forms as a Purna Kumbha, Purna Kalasha, most notably the goddess Lakshmi, who is often represented in this particular form in various festivals. I'm going to focus particularly in the Nagas from now onwards, right, as a specific category of these nature spirits and how they pervade Indian imagery, but also show you a bit from Southeast Asia, where I come from. So Nagas and Nagis are basically deified snakes, but they also refer to the actual real snakes. And they're not just any snakes, but they're cobras in particular. Cultural attitudes to other species of snake are actually quite, varied in India. Like pythons, for example, are not necessarily seen as sacred in the same way cobras are. And of course, killing a cobra incurs terrible karmic consequences, nagadosha, sarpadosha, which is not really the case with like vipers or pythons or other species of snakes. Now, with the nagas, they are associated in particular with water. So snakes are very common in the monsoon season here in the Indian subcontinent. And so there was a natural association between water, rain, and snakes. And so they were often depicted as deities that had the capacity to provide water for crops, for fertility, and so on. Also, they were also involved in, they were placated as a means to acquire more children. So that fertility association also extends to childbirth in the case of the Nagas. And like the Yakshas, they were ambivalent deities. They could both protect you, but also harm you. Their earthly manifestations could, of course, kill you with a single bite. Now, like the Yakshas, they were integrated into these other religious traditions as well. In both Buddhist and Jain traditions, we find a very similar story about a Nagaraja, a Naga king, who protects the enlightened teacher, Muchalinda, in the case of the Buddha. And Muchalinda is interestingly not just the name of the snake, but also the name of the tree in which the snake resides. So there's this overlapping of the tree and Naga spirit in this particular story. And in the case of Pashvanatha, the Jinnah, he is protected by a snake king called Dharanendra in the stories relating to him. But the timeline is slightly different. In the Buddha's case, the snake protecting him happens after enlightenment, and in Pashvanatha's case, it happens before the enlightenment process. But the motif otherwise is shared by both of these traditions. And that's also the case with other Hindu deities that we might be familiar with, like Balarama, for example, whom you saw on the screen. So and a corpus that has been ignored, I think, in the study of early Naga imagery is cave paintings. There are quite a number of them that depict Nagas. In fact, many of these early caves are also named after Nagas because the overhanging roof of the cave resembles the flaring hood of a cobra. And in this particular case from Karnataka, you see the flared hood of the cobra painted onto the cave itself. Now, dating rock art is, of course, difficult. A lot of the dating tends to go on a stylistic basis in this case. So how else are Nagas depicted when they appear in stone? So one typical way is a human figure who has these flaring hoods of the cobra, typically 5 hoods or some kind of odd number, 3 or 7 as well, that emerges from behind the human figure. But otherwise they look like the Yakshas. They're kind of pot-bellied and corpulent in this case. So here again, you see the Balarama image that I showed you earlier. So he's not just a Naga deity, he has agricultural associations indicated by the plow that he holds. And again, he has this pot-bellied appearance that is shared with the Yakshas. So these are just a few more images of Balarama. Many of these Naga images tend to be erected in open-air shrines that were placed close to sources of water like lakes, rivers, or even irrigation structures in some cases. So these are 2 examples from Southeast Asia, from Vietnam and Cambodia, that show you similar forms that were transmitted from the Indian subcontinent to those regions as well. The other common way in which Nagas are depicted is sort of a half human, half snake form, like with the lower half of their body being entirely serpentine, such as the ones you see on the screen. And we more rarely in the ancient periods also have figures with the upper part of the body being a Naga and the lower part being human. In this case, this figure is also carrying a palm leaf manuscript. And finally, they also appear in their completely serpentine forms as multi-hooded cobras. And these are examples from Southeast Asia, where in the Angkor region, for example, they're very commonly found as very large balustrades leading up to the temples. And it's not uncommon to find both of these forms coexisting with each other. You find both the humanoid and the entirely serpentine forms in the same context, such as the Jetavana Vihara in Anuradhapura in Sri Lanka. And besides stone, we also have lots of ancient terracotta images, some of them very highly stylized from the ancient periods as well. Okay, so just very briefly, the evidence for them is independent deities. So while I mentioned that they were absorbed into various other religious traditions, sometimes as subsidiary deities, in the ancient period they were also venerated as independent deities. There is a rare surviving Naga temple near Rajagriha, the old Magadha capital, called Maniyar Mutt, which was dedicated to a Naga called the Mani Naga, right? There's an inscription on the site that tells us the name of this Naga, and you see his image here as well. Um, and it's interestingly a circular temple. It was regularly renovated in later periods. So these terracotta sculptures that you see of Nagas were added in the Gupta period, but now they've been completely lost. They were destroyed at some point in the late 20th century. And there's another important ancient Naga temple at Sonk, which is a village not too far away from Mathura. This was excavated by a German archaeologist, Herbert Hettel. And the Naga image that was recovered from here has been repurposed as the goddess Chamunda, right? So, this living aspect of ancient images is something that was discussed in both the exhibition and the book. And there's a lot of this kind of reappropriation going on in many other contexts as well. And this temple, interestingly, had a torana, like the ones that you might be familiar with from, say, Sanchi, for example. In this case, it depicts the two Naga deities to whom this temple was dedicated. We don't know who the Nagas were. Herbert Hettel, hypothesized that it might be dedicated to Vasugi, the king of the snakes, but we're not sure because there's no inscription from the site. Okay, and I'm going to run through this quickly. There are lots of other epigraphic inscriptional sources from Nagas in the Mathura region, and what they always tend to indicate is that the shrines were close to sources of water, in this case a water tank, a pushkarani, or sometimes they were open-air shrines next to irrigation structures, like the ones that you find around Sanchi in Madhya Pradesh. And this very impressive, multi-hooded Naga next to a sluice gate, which is kind of an irrigation structure, or even fountains, but these are sort of from later periods. Now, I'm going to end off by saying that, it's not just these humanoid and serpentine forms that we encounter in Naga worship, but the ephemeral forms are just as important, right? And in fact, these may be archaeologically invisible because they do not survive. The same thing goes for the tree shrines. So in the case of the Nagas, they're very commonly worshipped, especially in rural contexts, in the form of these termite mounds, such as the one that you see on the screen. Deities can also be represented with unworked bricks and stones. So you see that again here on the screen right in front of the termite mound. And we know that this was an ancient practice because it's referred to in some ancient literature, like the Ajataka stories about, the Bodhisattva being born as a Naga prince and being venerated in a termite mound. And there's also visual depictions of them from the Amaravati Stupa. There are two of them. One relief is in the British Museum, the other in the Government Museum in Chennai. And here you see four men venerating a Naga that's emerging from the termite mound. This is probably a depiction of a Jataka story, but the fact that it's so prominent, especially in the art of Andhra, seems to suggest that this was probably a pre-existing practice in that region that was later overlaid by this Buddhist story. Okay, I think I will end there, but I'll just show you one more image of an ephemeral artistic tradition that I think, both of you are going to pick up on, the folk traditions. And this is very much a living tradition, which is something that the exhibition constantly emphasizes. The Pulluvans in Kerala, for example, are a caste that are associated with Naga worship. The women, regularly get possessed by Naga deities in these rituals, and they would erase these very elaborate paintings that they have drawn as part of their worship rituals as well. So with that, I will leave it to both of you to pick up on the tribal and folk aspects, which I've kind of ended with here as well. Thank you.
So this was fascinating because, like ancient Indian cultural traditions, ancient Indian history, there is so many entry points. And this is a specific entry point about the Nagas so that we can see how it now relates to the living traditions and to the folk and tribal traditions. So we let's continue, with our discussion. And one of the things that when we met for the first time today, we were just talking about how do we actually classify and define traditions as what is classical and what is folk, what is tribal, and how loaded these terms can be. And to just set the context before I open it to my fellow panelists, let me just say that all of these words are pretty loaded. When we say something is folk, when we say something is tribal, we call it vernacular, indigenous, it is all very loaded. And I'll give you a simple example from my experience. For the Asia Pacific Triennale at Kwagoma in Brisbane, we were doing for the first time a show that was not classical India, which meant that we were not doing the sculptures, we were not doing art, classical art, but we were looking at folk and tribal art from India, which I was familiar with calling as folk and tribal. But my colleague over there did not like the term folk and tribal. We could not use indigenous because you had the Aboriginal people in Australia. We struggled for the longest time as to what term to use for that exhibition, and we ended up with an unhappy compromise of vernacular. And this is, I teach folk and tribal art to students, and this is one area where we are always talking that should we call it perennial art, permanent art, what should we call it? And I would really like both of you to jump in as to how do we define, how do we classify, because today words are loaded. So any of you would like to say that how do we even begin looking at what is classical, because it is a continuum. And what do you think about it?
So I agree with you in that these are very problematic labels. If you've seen in my slides, there's so much cross-pollination between these various traditions. And, it leads to the question of who gets to define what is classical. Is it socioeconomic status, elite status, caste status that defines what it means to be classical? Does it have to be in a particular kind of linguistic medium to count as classical? I think some of these labels are also posthumous. The people living in that time period creating these pieces would not have obviously used such anachronistic labels, but we retrospectively kind of project them onto these productions as well.
Absolutely. And a lot of the terms, become problematic because they were sort of colonial constructs, and post-colonial, you are trying to look at how to define it better. But I think Mr. Kreitz has a take on this also.
I hate labels, and I really get tired with people trying to define what they are. We work with these artists. They are artists in their own right, whether they're tribal or folk. Words are my favorite word is autochthonous, but autochthonous, which means coming from residing in your place of origin. It's like Adivasi. I like autochthonous, but it's not going to catch on. It's a very hard word to put your tongue around. So I, being old-fashioned, older than all of you, I like folk and tribal. I think the folk people, they're minstrels, they're wandering mendicants, and the tribals belong to an identifiable tribe. They identify themselves as a tribe, forest dwellers. So I've kind of stuck with folk and tribal. I find that, but I would like to know if you could define a little more clearly about what is classical to you. I mean, is it the great tradition? Because there's also folk and tribal tradition in ancient India as well. So how do you, because Professor Suresh has done a wonderful exhibition is it still on?
No, it's just recently closed in October.
He did a wonderful exhibition at the British Museum in London it was titled Ancient India, Living Traditions, which is a really wonderful title because when you see our images of folk and tribal artists, you will see the living connection between the past and the present. It was a great show. Wonderful. Now, if you just a little bit more definition about classical.
So even in the ancient period, I mean, if we look at the images and the deities that are being depicted initially, the yakshas and yakshis, this is a very sort of ground up phenomenon. These are not the deities of the elites. These are not the most important deities of the Vedic pantheon, for example. It's not Agni, Indra, Brihaspati who are being represented, but Kubera, Manibhadra, Lakshmi, and sort of these deities that have very widespread appeal, right? So the folk is kind of already embedded in at the inception of what we call classical art.
Okay. We've got the images now. So Minhazz and I are going to briefly discuss some of the folk and tribal artists that we work with. I personally, I've lived in your country for 55 years. It's been my home, and I'm planned to stay the rest of my life here. And I think in art, the most exciting thing happening today is folk and tribal art and tantric. All of these are connected. And I've been working for half a century to promote this art. And finally, it's beginning to be understood, accepted, and appreciated. So we'll start with the individual that I consider the most important tribal artist that India has ever produced. This is Jangar Singh Sham from Madhya Pradesh, born in the village of Patangad. He was discovered by Swaminathan. Swaminathan sent a team of scholars and students all over Madhya Pradesh to find people who had talent. And he was one of the ones that they found. My wife and I collected his art for 20 years before he tragically committed suicide in 2001. He's a wonderful artist who, in his lifetime, far transcended the label of tribal. He's a major Indian artist on every level. Nick, his career started at the Pompidou Center in Paris in 1978. There was a wonderful exhibition called Magicians of the Earth. He went there. He was a young boy, and one of the artists from India could not come, so they asked him to paint these walls in one day. So he painted the walls in one day, and overnight he became a sensation. And you can go back one. You can see on the left already we're connecting to Professor Suresh's slides. The tree, and the Naga. On the left, the tree and the Naga, and one of the Goan tribal gods on the right. In Madhya Pradesh, when the tribal artists depict the Naga, it usually lives either near a body of water, like Professor Suresh mentioned, but also every sacred tree has a Naga living at the base of it, like here. This is Jangar Singh's cousin, Narmada Prasad Tekam. I consider him the most important artist of the Goan tribe after Jangar Singh. Very gifted artist who sadly left us a year ago in 2024. This is a very interesting lady. Her name is Jodaya Baiga. She was discovered by a wonderful artist called Ashish Swami. She was carrying bricks on her head and helping him set up his studio. And he asked her, "Do you paint?" She said, "I don't know." So he said, "Here's some paint, brushes, paper." A few years ago, she got the Padma Shri. Yeah. Jodaya Baiga. She also left us a couple of years ago. She was wonderful. She was really wonderful. I'll tell you this one short story. She met the Prime Minister, and she told him, "I live in a kacha house, and I want you to build me a paka house." So the Prime Minister looked at her and he said, "Ho jayega." He didn't build it. She went back to the village. She called up NDTV and he said he would build me the house, but he didn't. She had the house in 2 months. So this is women power. It's a wonderful artist from Chhattisgarh named Pisado Rab Mandavi. The Mandavis are uh, related to the Gonds. They're a subcaste of Gond, and he's living today. And I consider him the most important tribal artist working today in the country. And again, he's doing this 7 foot high image of the Sheshnag, which again connecting to the multi-headed Nagas.
So yes, this point of how, what we consider ancient is living even today. So this is an absolute living example of how cultural ideas are transmitted through the length and breadth of this country.
This is Jodiah Bai, one of her paintings. I love this painting. It's the marriage of two flowering trees. One is the mahua tree and one is the kadamba tree. And the villagers are dancing under the tree. The snakes are in the trees and they're adorning the trees with dupattas. So tree worship, serpent worship, it's all alive and well today. This is Pisado Ram's early painting, one of his first, which shows the connection to the jungle, to nature, to the creatures of the jungle, which he continues to paint till today. The Baiga tribe especially collect the flowers of the mawa tree, and they are collected, and then they make they distill a local liquor from that, So, but you see, surrounded by the mawa flowers are also the creatures of the forest. The connection to animals is very important. This is Pisado Ram's. It's a wonderful painting. This is a very large painting, about 7 foot by 5 foot. It shows a banyan tree. Again, the snake, the naga, the serpent who lives at the base of the tree. That's another image of his Sheshnag, the one he was painting earlier. This is Jangar Singh's drawing. He was, as I mentioned, he was my friend. So one day, I got this painting from him, this drawing from him, and I said, Jangar, those lines coming out of the animal, the deer, the hiran, is that an halo? Is that an aura? Do you see that light? And he looked at me and he said, Don't you? Don't you see that light? And I felt very inadequate, and I still do, because I don't see that light, but he saw that light. This is Pisado Ram. The Mandavi tradition is very important for Primordialism, for the use of dots. When they decorate their homes, they sing the dot song, and they go into a semi-trance while they're doing all the decoration of the home, which is done in myriad colors of dots. This is a tiger. And this is a tiger from the Baiga tradition, the bogs, and it has all the different symbols and animals and creatures inside.
So what I would like to add at this point is that if we didn't tell you this was from a Bega tribe, or this was from a tribe or from India, this could be from anywhere in the world. And this is one of the points that in the work that Mr. Kreitz and I are doing. One of them is that when we say traditions and we say cultures, we expect a lot of the artists to be nameless, faceless carriers of tradition. And that is what we are trying to buck. Even if they are not educated and they cannot sign their name in any language, they have symbols that they sign with, because they didn't get to go to school and learn, how to write their own name. But then the idea was that they should each develop a symbol as a sign, because the idea of individual artistry becomes very important when we talk about these cultures and traditions.
The artist is Julad Bai. She's passed away, and she chose as her symbol the flag. So that's what she uses. This is another Mandavi artist, Sukhdev Mandavi. It was bought by a friend of mine from London. She said, "Look, the lizards are in love. Look how tender. Look how beautiful they love each other and hug each other." I love this. Right? Look at all the use of dots, also the pointillism of the painting. This is Jangar Singh's, I think, most powerful painting he ever created. I worked very hard with Minhazz to get it placed in the National Gallery of Australia in Canberra, in their museum. This is the Sheshnag. It's part snake, it's part human, it's part Shiva. It's very important. Very important painting. And very, very powerful. It's quite big, about 5 feet by 4 feet. This is his Pisadu Ram's version of Lord Shiva. Again, filled with all these dots. And look at the one little foot at the bottom. It's really wonderful.
Closer to yourself, the mic.
Closer, okay. This is Jodhayabai, her Bolinath or Lord Shiva. Very powerful painting. This is again the Darbar of Lord Shiva. And this is one of Jangar Singh's most powerful paintings, the Lord Ganesha, a very abstract and very colorful version. This is again Lord Ganesha by Pisadu Ram, which is a very powerful painting. So you see they depict both the classical tradition as well as their own tribal gods. This is Jangar Singh. This is also interesting. This is a Bharadev. This is the tribal god. And one day he came to see me, and he said, I have a problem. I said, what is the problem? He said, I am drawing the gods and goddesses, but I haven't asked permission from them. And they are very powerful, and they come out at night, and I'm afraid they will hurt me. What do you think I should do? I said, I think the gods and the goddesses will be happy that you gave them form. So don't worry about it, and keep drawing them. And also the other thing, as Minhazz was saying, many of the artists at the beginning did not sign their paintings. So with Jangar, you'll see at the bottom of the drawing, I asked him to put his name, put the date, and put the title of the painting. And one of the artists, I remember, started to cry. I said, why are you crying? They said, because you want people to tell that I'm alive beyond my painting. So it's very important to realize that they are powerful artists in their own right. That may be another one of the gone gods. This is a very powerful painting by a Baiga artist named Ranmati Bai. This is the dance of the Devi Matas. It's a wonderful painting, 5 foot high and about 25 feet long. And she and her husband are very religious. He dresses up as the Devi Mata. He dresses up as the goddess. She plays the drum and he dances, and they go to temples. It's still alive and well. This is another one of her mother goddesses. Another one. And this is a very powerful Nimish. Which goddess is this? Fulwadi Devi, the goddess of flowers. And this, we're ending with Suresh, something else that's alive is the shamanistic tradition of healing. The Baiga tribe they have a woman who's called the Baigan. Sounds like something out of Harry Potter. She's the Baigan, and she is a witch and a healer. And she has all the power. And this is the Baigan on the left, and she's exorcising a demon from one of the villagers, from the child, the baby of in the village. And this is also they're making healing medicine. This is the Mandavi tribe. So the tradition of it comes today. We have Ayurvedic, other traditional medicines. This tradition is still alive and well. Here also, they're concocting different remedies for different ailments. I end with this very powerful painting by Narmanda Prasad, who is the cousin of Jangar Singh Sham. These are three goddesses, and they are creating a medicine to heal someone in the tribe. It's a very powerful painting, and I'll end with that one. So
Thank you for being so patient and seeing through this, because the point of all of this is that what we revered in ancient times, that as man was trying to understand the world around him, understand his own physiological processes that were going, death, birth, illnesses, we invoked a lot of the nature spirits, we invoked the Nagas. And as you can see, these are still continuing even today. That the artists who are in the 21st century who are painting these paintings in our villages in India still carry those primordial messages of how you revere the snake gods, and it can vary across India, but that sense or the spirit of what is sacred is still continuing. What would you like to add a little to that about the sense of sacredness?
I mean, one thing that struck me as you were sharing those images was the sheer affinity for the natural world, which is shared by all of these artistic streams, whether we call it folk, classical, the wild boars, the monitor lizards, the cobras, the tigers. And these are shared by all of these artistic traditions. And there's also a question of where they come from. I mean, in early Indian art, there's a lot of focus on the external influences, Greco-Roman or Persian influences, but there are no prototypes for the Udumbara tree or the Ashoka tree or the Bodhi tree. These are local species, right? So there must have been an ephemeral artistic tradition, very much like the living traditions that you were talking about, that has informed the creation of what we now consider to be classical.
What do you say to that?
no, I think that's absolutely right. And I wanted in your slides what I found interesting were the cave paintings of Madhya Pradesh, because our artists, we take them to the cave paintings, and they look at them and they say that's us, that's us. They identify how many 1,000, 2,000 years, Bimbetka and other paintings. They still feel that connection.
Yeah, I mean, Madhya Pradesh is amazing in that regard because there's so many of these cave sites with fantastic rock art. And the wonderful thing about this art is that it's coexisting with what we call classical as well. It's spanning many different time periods. It starts in the prehistoric period, goes into the early historic, and even up to modern periods. You still find people living images, or more recently, of course, graffiti at these sites. But it's very much a living tradition that coexists with what we call classical. And it's unfortunate that I think that particular trajectory has not been integrated into mainstream Indian art histories, where we don't see the rock art. We've kind of sidelined it in some ways as well.
Yes. So it's growing. The interest is growing. What is also the tribals face a lot of problems. Now, sometimes there's pressure from local officials. You worship our gods. You worship the Shiva, Lakshmi, Ganesha. And I say, what do you do? I said, well, they offer us money. They offer us alcohol. They offer us saris. And we tell them, yes, we will worship those gods and goddesses. And we go home and we worship our own. So, there's still there's an interaction, but basically the tribal artists are deeply attached to their own tribal traditions. The Baigas have many mother goddesses: the goddess of the roof, the goddess of the ghat, the goddess of the night. All of these goddesses or gods and goddesses are still alive.
Yes, and that is the interesting point, that there are benefic gods and goddesses and dangerous gods and goddesses that need to be propitiated. So when the dance of the Devi Matas that we showed you, one of the things that was most moving to me as a city dweller was that they have a goddess of the pots that they buy. So the pots that they buy, unlike our consumer society where we buy what we want when we want, they would buy 3 pots a year. Once the monsoons are over, there are 3 pots that they buy. And so you can see the symbiotic relationship between the potter of the community and the tribal society. And the 3 pots, one would be for drinking water, one would be for cooking water, and one would be for water for ritual uses. So can you imagine in your life, in your year, water which you need every day, you are only buying 3 pots, So the kind of reverence that they have, I mean, for me, as somebody who's worked in rural areas but lives in a city, it was humbling to see that there was a goddess of the ghat, as he said, and before doing any ritual, you take permission of that ghat mai before you do a ritual, which, because I live in Uttarakhand and I see the state of the rivers today, how we throw trash, and we are just, people are pulling out bottles. There was so much to learn. There was so much to kind of respect in that. And our life mission in a way has been that we have to create that space in white cube galleries, in museums, in discussions, in schools, for respect for the embodied knowledge that is in tribal society, which is expressed through their art, So that is a very big part of, I think, how we should look at tribal knowledge and see the continuum, but also take the lessons for us in this kind of ecologically beleaguered world that we live in.
Yeah.
What-
I was also struck by the anecdote that you had, Mitch, about the artist who was a dancer, like dressed up as a mother goddess with his wife being a musician. So these are not just artists, they are ritualists, they are practitioners. And that's so deeply intertwined with this particular artistic tradition in particular. The Pullavans that I shared with you, the image of them like drawing that snake drawing on the floor with colored powders. They're not just artists, but they're ritual specialists. People also consult them for snake bites. So there are practical aspects to their occupation as well, if you were to put it that way. And that also applies to the Irulas in northern Tamil Nadu, for example. They're not just ritual specialists and artists, but they also catch snakes and they cure snake bites. So it's kind of a package. And
You're from Singapore,
that's right.
and this is your first time to India.
I've been to India many
Yeah,
times.
I mean, you didn't grow up here.
No,
Are you surprised at how alive and well these traditions are connecting to ancient India? And also, do you see that connection in other parts of Southeast Asia? I mean, are they still doing the rangoli, the designs with the serpents, and is this kind of thing still the traditions that came from India and went to Southeast Asia and Indonesia, Cambodia, are they still alive and well?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, they've evolved and localized over time, so sometimes it's almost unrecognizable as having originated in the Indian.
But you can see the roots.
But you can, like, I mean, with the tree spirits, for example, in Thailand, they venerate particular female tree spirits, Nang Takian, for example, associated with a particular species of tree. She's often placated with these very rich bridal silk dresses. If you find them hanging on a tree in Thailand, you should know that it's a tree shrine dedicated to that particular goddess. Now, interestingly, that is a tree species that's only found in eastern India, but it's not really venerated in India. So there we have, they might have picked up a habit, but they have focused on a local species. So, or it might have been a convergent development, because we, of course, see these sort of nature worship traditions in many other world cultures. And in the case of Southeast Asia, we do have early images of yakshas, yakshis. We go to Angkor Wat, it's full of these auspicious women who are grasping vegetation. And you can immediately see that, these are prototypes can be sourced in earlier yakshi imagery as well. So all of those connections exist. And they're very much living traditions in Southeast Asia as well. In Singapore, you can easily find a tree shrine that's shared by different communities, whether Indian, Chinese, or so on.
What about language? Like when I was in Malaysia, I was struck that in Malay, Dakshina, south, Uttara, north, Pradhan, all that. It's all. Do you still see that in Singapore as well?
That's right. I mean, the local languages do inherit Sanskritic vocabulary, like the word for state, Nagara, for example, from Nagara and so on. You can create entire dictionaries out of them, and people have indeed. So that's very much part of the living legacy as well, the way people speak and the terminology that they use to express themselves as well. There.
Yeah, I think the point really comes to that not just are there living traditions in India, but the arc from India, how it has gone all the way across Southeast Asia in terms of, the culture, the language is still so valid and vivid today, also the way it works. So, yeah. So we can just give some concluding comments and then we can open up for some questions. It would be good. So if you'd like to.
So one takeaway for me is that, I think the lines between these various classical folk traditions are very nebulous. In fact, there's so much interweaving. I feel just like you said, Mitch, I don't like these labels. So I would completely ditch them as well. I'm happy to do so.
What about you, sir?
Yes. I just want to invite everybody to come and see. We have a booth here, and it has some of the most important tribal masters that are working today and some that are gone. So, and when you come there, it'll connect to what you saw today. And you won't get many opportunities to see this level of tribal art. So I invite you to please come. And I'm delighted with this discussion because I hope it brings to all of you how important it is to keep these traditions alive and to support tribal and folk art in every way possible. Thank you.
So as someone who comes from the northeast of India, I have quintessentially been an outsider wherever I have been in India, because there is so little understanding of the part of the country that I come from. So for me, it was a natural affinity to start working with folk and tribal because I understood what it meant to that need to be seen, to be understood, and to be seen in a wider context. So for me, the takeaways for today's discussion is it's so heartening that in India we still have a culture that is 5,000 years old and still alive. Pieces of terracotta that were made, like the Shashti, goddess Shashti, which were the bird mother figurine, if you ever look at Indus Valley figurines, they continue to be made today in Eastern India, but worshipped as Shashti, the nurturer of the mother and the child. So to see through your slides and what we have presented, that continuity is really wonderful. So we open up for questions or observations now. Yeah.
Just one more thing. In India, you are blessed. Most of the rest of the world, the connections to the deepest roots are gone. If an Egyptian artist working today, what does he know about pharaonic ritual? The Chinese, it's gone. So many parts of the world, the connection is gone. When I talk to my family back in America, I said, you can cross the street and you can see a Vedic ritual going on that's 2,500 years old. Where else do you have that? You are blessed. Blessed.
So yeah, we open up for questions. Yes.
Thank you. When you look at tribal art in India, it's a localized phenomena. There's nothing like all India tribal art. Now, when you look at local tribal art, they basically use local material for creating their art. And when they did that, they were limited in the sense that if you didn't have yellow color appearing in anything locally, yellow color could never appear in your painting. Now I find that the same tribal type of painting which is being made today is using acrylic. Although everything else is similar, but is using acrylic. When you use acrylic, you're not limited by local colors. So you see all kinds of colors appearing in locally in, uh, tribal art created today. Does this detract from the authenticity of tribal art?
So that's a very interesting question, and I will answer it not just in painting, but even in textiles. So, what is happening? Yes, a lot of the artists, even today, continue to make their own colors. And there are interesting repercussions to that. For example, I took a Patachitra artist who makes these long scrolls from West Bengal where they make all the colors, every color is made by themselves. And I took him to Australia and he got an opportunity to work in a printmaking workshop. He was very happy doing the lino cuts, he was very happy doing the etchings, and we had two other artists from Bihar. Then he suddenly comes to me and he says, I'm really sorry, I can't do this. And, being, especially after Jangar's passing away in Japan, all of us who work in the field of culture are very sensitive that we do not, offend or upset the artist. So I was very concerned and I said, why can't you do the printing? I mean, it's a fun thing, it's something new. It was anathema for him to wipe the excess paint and throw it in the bin, because that's what you do when you make prints. You take the excess paint off. He couldn't take it off because every color was handmade. When you talk about authenticity, yes, in certain cases, the authentic nature, if they had a limited color palette, for example, Varli, which is only brown and or the red and with white, now they're doing it with indigo. So you do change the nature, but what you have to be conscious is that at the same time you keep the samples of the original art going also, so that they don't forget it totally. But yes, with today's materials that they can access, the opportunities that they have, because they are not now making it for themselves alone. Like Madhubani painting and Varli paintings were usually made for marriages, but today they are making for homes across the world. So they do expand their artistic language and their vision, but efforts have to be made to keep what was originally made also true, like still there. So, would you like to add anything you would like to say though? Anyone else? Yeah.
This question is to nobody in particular, but I think the main theme of this talk was cultural preservation. My question is, as a layman, how would you give me advice to keep engaging and honoring these primordial forms of art? Especially because, Mitchell, you said we're really culturally lucky to have these presences. I would want to know, what would your advice on this be?
Well, I've been working in this area for 50 years. I think you would have tribal and folk artists all around you. About a year ago, I was in Delhi and there was a snake charmer and his family in the street. I just got out of the car and said, do you paint? And they said, no. I said, well, I always carry paints and paper and brushes, and they are now doing very nice art. So you have to be aware. You need to support them. Go to the craft melas, go to wherever the different shops. When you see them buy the art, support the art, and realize that it's important. You can do it in lots of ways, I see people here where some people, they're wearing khadi, they're wearing folk jewelry, tribal jewelry. Bombay is full of much more than Delhi. I was quite shocked, full of people who seem very connected to the khadi tradition of decoration design. There are many ways you can do it, and you should.
So, what I would like to say is, because, and this comes from an experience of teaching in India in design schools and colleges. Unfortunately, till the 12th grade, our education system focuses on memorizing and not on experiences. So, I think for young people especially, they should get out, go and see the artists, go to whatever local, like you may have a bazaar, a craft bazaar, go there, see them, talk to them, learn from them, because it's not just about an aesthetic expression, it's also embodied knowledge. Like, for example, the Patachitra artists, they make color from vegetables, but they fix it by using the glue from the raw bale fruit, the stone apple. So who is going to document that knowledge, that they are not using a chemical additive, but they are using the raw bale fruit gum? Cut a raw bale fruit and you'll see how sticky it is, and that is the gum that they use to fix the paint. Or some other tradition is using something else. So both from knowledge and the aesthetic expression point of view, engage. My one word answer would be engage with these artists.
And Suresh, you're in a very powerful position. You will have your graduate students, your undergraduates. Encourage them to come here to meet with the tribals, the artists, and do their research here also. I think you can make a big difference in the academic world.
Definitely. I think educators have a big part to play in this in terms of exposure and then knowledge imparting. I mean, there are lots of wonderful folk art museums here in India as well, right? You know, those could be wonderful starting points for lots of educators here. Like,
Anyone else? Yeah.
Sir, I wanted to ask what fascinated you to find these tribal artists? Means how did you indulge into like to go and research and work on these tribal artists? And because as per as I have heard that people used to say that these were the craft, not a art. These tribal artists.
I came to India in 1966 to do my PhD in ancient Indian history. I'm still here. I couldn't leave. I saw the stone carvers, the inlay artisans, and then one day in Delhi, there appeared black and white drawings of Jangar Singh Sham. And there were about 10 of us who would go every month to the Craft Museum and buy his work. And then one day he came to Delhi. He came to the Sureshkumar Craft Mela. And I met him. And from then on, you meet one, they introduce you to another one, another one, another one. And it never ends, you know. And I never thought that he would become famous or his art would become valuable. My wife and I just loved his art. So you can decorate your home with beautiful drawings of tribal artists. They're original. They're signed. You know, they're really works of art. And they will escalate in value. You know, you should not buy art because it's a good investment. But it is actually. So it's been the most. I mean, I'm trained in Mughal architecture. I did 12 years of Sanskrit. My tradition was the classical tradition that I was studied. But when I came here, I fell in love with the folk tradition and the tribal tradition. And it's been very nourishing and it's been a wonderful experience. And I want to thank all of you for the opportunity to live and work and enjoy your wonderful country. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.